Politicians campaign for our vote, they then take office and no longer interested in our what is important to us. So the actions that I think would restore confidence in the National Police Service would be a disbandment of the multi-agency team that has been responsible for tracking and abducting young Kenyans, not taking them to police stations, but essentially holding them in black sites and in detention centers that are not lawful. I think we can see, we can argue that without the arrest and arraignment of officers that discharge their weapons unlawfully on unarmed protesters, there will be no trust. So narcissism at its very essence produces the conditions where men feel entitled to women's bodies. They feel that if they're rejected, they have a right to hurt those women. Narcissism is responsible for a public participation policy that listens to people and then ignores what it is that they're telling you if it doesn't fit with what policies you wanted to perpetrate or to pursue. My name is Irungu Houghton. I'm the Executive Director of Amnesty International Kenya. Amnesty International Kenya is a membership organization that is located in about 3/4 of the country, and we organize to protect human rights for all people. I think narcissism in a political context is the abuse of political and public office for private gain. I think how it shows up greatest is where politicians campaign for our vote, they then take office and no longer interested in our what is important to us, but essentially becomes self-interested, become preoccupied with either accumulating large amounts of wealth or experimenting with policies that have no public support. The Gen Z protest movement was a fundamental break in a number of things. I think historically we felt that the youth were a politically useless demographic, that they were not interested in political change. They were not interested in exercising their rights as citizens under the Constitution. But what we saw in 2024, particularly on June the 25th, was a profound statement that actually young people do care. They care deeply. They just don't see the opportunity within liberal democratic structures, elections, parliament, and the executive, the opportunity to be able to express themselves. And therefore they took extrajudicial, extra legal measures to basically make their voices clear. Yes, I mean, I think one of the most painful moments was seeing the use of excessive force and arbitrary arrests, but also the abductions and the killings of protesters, many of whom were peaceful. They carried no more violent a tool than a constitution or the Kenyan flag, or that they were essentially carrying bottles of water and their smartphones. And I think what we have to condemn is the use of state violence against unarmed protesters, essentially many of them expressing themselves under Article 37 and the right to assembly, the right to free expression. And I think that is probably one of the things that Amnesty has been most concerned about over this period. There are four strategies that we've used throughout this year. First of all, is document human rights abuses, to document them, that not just that they have happened, but the rights and freedoms that they have infringed upon within our constitutional order and within the laws. The second, essentially, is to provide legal representation. Many of the 1,700 cases of arbitrary arrested were actually overturned, and many of those people walked out without any conditions or without any charges, simply because the charges were defective. The third area is to ensure that the protesters had access to medical support. We're very proud of the voluntarism that we saw among Medics for Kenya and other medical doctors and health workers. They set up impromptu and also kind of pop-up medical centers. And they faced great intimidation, arrest, and also, direct violation of their right to be able to treat protesters and police officers and bystanders. So the third area was really medical support. The fourth area has been to seek justice and accountability for those that fell during the protests. We will not rest until the 60 plus people who were killed unlawfully have their day in court, and those officers are held accountable for essentially what is extrajudicial use of force and excessive use of force. I think what the young emerging leadership that we saw this year have taught us is that words are cheap, actions are much more powerful. So the actions that I think would restore confidence in the National Police Service would be a disbandment of the multi-agency team that has been responsible for tracking and abducting young Kenyans, not taking them to police stations, but essentially holding them in black sites and in detention centers that are not lawful. I think we can see, we can argue that without the arrest and arraignment of officers that discharge their weapons unlawfully on unarmed protesters, there will be no trust. I think until we see the families of those that fell, until we see them receive compensation for the deaths that they have experienced, there will be no trust. I think until we see a new way of policing protests that doesn't involve deaths and injuries, until we see that, we will not have trust in the process. So I think these are four areas where I think Kenyans are demanding a change of policing strategy and a change of oversight. Not just by the Independent Policing Oversight Authority, but also from the Ministry of Interior and the Office of the State House. I think proactively we have to be prepared to study and to investigate what actually lies behind these dramatic incidents that we've seen. Many Kenyans are experiencing, a form of mass trauma because of the violence that has gone across their screens or across their gadgets. And I think one of the things that would be important to do is to actually go into these moments with a bit more depth, to understand what is it that produces the kind of violence that we've seen, and also what happens after the cameras stop rolling. What happens to those families? How do they continue without a loved one, or continue with fear that this could happen at any point? Many of the scenes that we saw were very dramatic. I mean, the use of mass tear gas in places like Pipeline and Githurai and places like that. It's impossible to imagine what it would be like to have to go back into those homes knowing that you could be violated by large numbers of police officers, water cannons and tear gas canisters. I think it's important to continue to keep the public aware of the enduring impact of that violence. I think the second area really is around helping Kenyan citizens to understand what are their rights, what are the rights that are violated in moments like that, so that they can understand and appreciate how important it is for them to continue to resist the violation of their rights, but also to be able to become much more tactical and agile in responding to what might be happening. As Amnesty International, we will continue to document these cases. Next week, we have another report coming out on the 2023 Sufuria protests. We're going to document and share to the nation a number of things that many people didn't hear about during that process. And much of that is the storytelling that's needed to be able to create a culture in which we appreciate the importance of rights-based policing and also accountability for unjust actions that take place in moments of protest. So these are some of the things that we will continue working with the media on. The media mustn't turn its back on the experiences of journalists, medical officers, lawyers, and also protesters over this year. In 2010, Kenyans voted for a new constitution. We voted against the imperial presidency. We voted against the idea that one person or one office would have the power to essentially investigate, or rather cause investigations, prosecutions, and convictions of crimes. We said that there has to be a balance that is kept between those, the different arms of the criminal justice system. We also spoke about the importance of keeping Parliament independent of the executive and judiciary independent of the executive. And I think these are important pillars in a democracy that is able to protect itself. Without that, we will just see a one-person dictatorship, an authoritarian system that is in nobody's interest. Controversially, I would say not even in the interest of the autocrat, because ultimately what it will produce is the seeds of that autocrat's destruction. So it is important to safeguard the constitutional freedoms and the constitutional separation of powers that we have voted for, and we must continue to protect. So narcissism at its very essence produces the conditions where men feel entitled to women's bodies. They feel that if they're rejected, they have a right to hurt those women. Narcissism is responsible for a public participation policy that listens to people and then ignores what it is that they're telling you if it doesn't fit with what policies you wanted to perpetrate or to pursue in the first place. Narcissism is what we see in schools with corporal punishment, where teachers think that they can, by beating children, discipline those children or produce upright citizens. Narcissism is behind the corruption that we see in our offices, where public officers feel that they have an entitlement to public funds. Narcissism is at the center of all that threatens this country, and therefore we have to find ways of challenging it in all those spaces.